Today, I am continuing to read from Maria Simma's book, Nikki Elt's book, when he interviewed Maria Simma, a book entitled Get Us Out of Here. She was visited by the poor souls in purgatory, and today we are going to learn what the poor souls told her about illness. Maria, have souls come to you whom you knew and who were disabled in any way during their lives? She says, yes, many. When they then appeared to me, they were completely healed of it. Wheelchairs are gone, deformations and scars are gone. Once, however, a soul came with a large goiter. Yet this was only so that the family would believe me when I told them that the relative had appeared to me with such and such instruction for them. See, they asked me what he looked like, and so when I mentioned the goiter, they believed me and thus listened to the instruction. Now, I remember one who was mute during his life and who, of course, spoke perfectly when he appeared to me. He showed joy at being able to speak to me, but I never found out why he could not speak while alive. If they were in wheelchairs in life, those are then gone and they walk perfectly. All minor as well as major imperfections are then gone. But please remember that I see only those in the higher level of purgatory. I say this not because others have seen sufferings and wounds on the souls, but these are not the same ones that were there during their lives. These are then sufferings of the soul and not of the body, for they no longer have a physical body. I think the closest I've seen to this was when a priest came to me, and after he told me what he needed, I was given the chance to ask him why his right hand was so black, dirty, and painful looking. His answer was, tell all the priests to bless people, homes, and religious objects all the time. I neglected to do this often, and therefore I must now suffer in my right hand. Nikki asks, is AIDS a punishment from God? Yes, it is, she says. But I prefer calling it reparation, and that for people's immorality. If this shocks people claiming that God then is not a loving God, punishment and reparation are also loving. And as for the innocent who are now also suffering from AIDS, that accounts for additional and necessary reparation. God's mercy is infinite, but his justice is also total. I say if we knew of his justice now as we will in heaven, many of us would die under the strain of our own sins. Maria, do you think they will find a cure for AIDS? We already have a cure today. But because it will not make any money for anybody and because it is very unpopular, people will still, for a while longer, be blind to it. The cure is Jesus and the 10 Commandments. He did not give us those to control us, but only to protect, strengthen, and free us. Well, that would be a preventative cure. How about a reparative cure, a healing of it once it's already been contracted? That too has already happened in very prayerful places. Where? I've heard of a place in Italy, but the name escapes me now, and then also in Medjugorje that has happened. The importance, however, is not the exact place, but rather the amount of prayer. He then asks, when people come into very prayerful places with great burdens and have already been checked by physicians, psychiatrists, and priests, and their condition seems to worsen rather than improve, can this be caused by some poor souls in their background? Maria says, yes, that can be the case, but if so, it is caused by souls that are very deep in purgatory. In these cases, a good exorcist will be able to stop the deceased from pressuring the living. Maria, can you tell me of an incident where non-forgiveness led to an illness? Oh, that is so very often the cause of illness. Yes, I remember a cause in Innsbruck where a young woman could simply not forgive her father. The situation was this. The father was alive. When the father was alive, he never gave any joy to his children. And in her case, when a good position came along, he refused to let her take it. It was a job that included a good amount of education, and his forbidding it caused her to wander through life without proper schooling. And it was this that she simply could not forgive. A short while after he died, he appeared to her, not once, but 3 times, begging her to forgive him. No, the daughter just couldn't. Then the woman fell ill, and during this time it suddenly dawned on her that she should forgive her father. She did, and did so deeply with all her heart. And then the quick illness quickly left her. I cannot remember now exactly what illness it was, but it did become clear to her that this was due to her long-term refusal to forgive. We cannot always forget things, but we must forgive. Non-forgiveness is the cause of the greatest burdens and limitations that we put on ourselves during our lives. If we go to God with it all, we become so much freer and fuller. And then also with forgiveness comes a much deeper understanding of what really happened. That also is a huge and very important grace. Yes, here's another case. It concerned an ugly and itching skin condition that a woman had for some 20 or more years. All modern medicine could do is give her very expensive cream to reduce the itching. Then she went on a pilgrimage and met with a prayerful and experienced person who one day during dinner turned to her and her husband and simply said, "Let's ask Jesus to tell us what causes that on your hands and your right leg from the knee downward." The instant he did, he had an internal vision showing a woman bending down with her right knee on the ground and with her hand stretched out toward a girl. The girl was the same woman as a child, and the woman in the vision was her mother. That mother had neglected to hold her children, and especially this one, now grown up. And she, in turn, had never forgiven her for this. When this was explained, the husband turned to his wife and said, "That's right. That's so right. You have never forgiven her for this." With tears in her eyes, she had to admit it. She took this intention into prayer and into Mass for just 2 or 3 days, and the condition receded to just a fraction of what it had been. Then they returned home, and the fellow who had had the vision never really heard whether it disappeared completely or not. But the itching and ugliness did go away nearly immediately. One cannot expect total forgiveness within the person to occur overnight. But Jesus surely showed the 3 who were present that evening where the problem was to be found. So again, the illness happened in a way that could have reminded the living of the sin of the ancestor, and in this way, the soul still in purgatory made itself known and was begging for forgiveness, before which it could not be delivered. Now I am certain that soul, whose name I never did hear, is in heaven, and her daughter is free of a condition that hurt, bothered her, and cost much money for several decades. Earlier, Maria, you mentioned that Satan sends illnesses upon people through witches and demons, with demons under their control. How does one discern whether an illness is caused by them or by something else? Maria says, by praying with the person or over the person. If it comes from elsewhere, the exorcism or deliverance prayer will show no results. But when it does come from demons, it will. It will at first try to hide or to fight back. But with a little perseverance, it will then depart. And in hospitals today, the term virus could be a possible warning signal for this. The term is often used by doctors when they come upon something they cannot explain. In such a case, get a priest or another powerful intercessor to them, and get friends or relatives to pray quickly for the intercession of Our Lady and of Saint Michael. The priest should also take along exorcised, blessed, and consecrated water, or better yet, oil. Maria, can you give me an example or two of illnesses sent upon someone demonically? Well, at the moment, I can think of 3 cases. One was pneumonia, another leukemia, and the third was a short but horridly painful case of back pains. This last case I know the most about because it happened to a friend of mine who for many months volunteered to work alongside one of the most respected priests in Europe. My friend suffered from a slightly pinched nerve between the 3rd and 4th vertebrae. This was at first treated with injections of a muscle relaxant, but these did not help at all, and it only became worse. By this time, the pain was terrible. He then suspected that this might be demonic, and he called for 2 priests. The first one came, but doubted his suspicion of this. After a long and fruitless discussion, the priest did finally go ahead and pray against it. At the moment that he did, the pains exploded and went running up and down my friend's right shoulder, arm, and thigh. It was as if a fork was ripping through his muscles and then stopping to grind into his joints. It raced up and down as the priest prayed, and then after 3 or 4 minutes, it receded dramatically. During this, however, my friend almost lost consciousness between spasms, cries, and screams. When it was over, the priest was in tears and acknowledged finally that the suspicion had been correct after all. Then 6 hours later, my friend, having slept a little, the second priest, the one for whom he was working, came to him as well, and he too started to pray against it. This time it only fought back to about 1/3 of what it had been before and then calmed down entirely. The next morning, he was up again after 5 days in bed and could resume with his work as before. 2 weeks later, he visited there and brought the situation to my exorcist friend. This man then prayed away the very small part that was still present and found out that it had been sent upon my friend by someone in that first town. My friend did not know the person there, but for the priest to have such a loyal and persevering assistant was enough to make the other one furious. Did the unknown person need to know or see that there was a weak link to say in your friend's back? Well, certainly the demons under the power of this poor person knew of this weak link. But also considering how well known the priest is, my friend was exposed to much spiritual warfare. Maria, do prayers for healing and for deliverance help from a distance if the person is not open to being prayed with? Oh, yes, definitely. And far too many people, including priests, do not have a faith strong enough to believe this and thus do not put it into practice. In the Bible, Jesus healed the centurion's servant at a distance. Then Jesus said to the centurion, "You may go as you have believed, it will be done for you." Jesus healed the servant due to his master's faith in him. But it wasn't the master's faith that did the healing. This often worries people who then think their faith is too weak to help. Jesus is never too weak to help, but we must often wait for his plan. That is often different from ours. But in such cases, when the afflicted is at a distance, it does help to have as much information as at all possible when praying against it. Often the demonic influences have to be named specifically before they let go and vanish. And to do so, we must pray a lot and do our homework with perseverance and trust that God will supply what we need. Maria, when people come to you with disturbances and you take the names of their deceased relatives, do you then witness the peace that enters the individual, the family, or the house in question after the masses and other prayers? Yes, almost always, depending, of course, on whether they keep it in touch. Many people stay in touch for a longer time, and although I am not a psychiatrist or physician with all those involved names on my tongue, I can certainly tell when a distressed child very quickly turns into a peaceful and happy child, and that without any therapy or drugs. It brings me much joy to see these changes repeatedly. Jesus and Mary exclude no one from their peace and joy. Excuse me. Maria, many different areas of medicine today use hypnosis as part of therapies or to find out what happened in the past that may have something to do with the illness involved. Have the souls said anything about hypnosis to you? Yes. The souls have said that hypnosis is dangerous and a sin. No one may delve into our subconscious. And even if they do, the testimonies that come from there are very unreliable. Some people who believe in the falsehood of reincarnation base their beliefs on the results of hypnosis. That is just one case where relatively small sin leads to much confusion. When people are very sick, and suffer in great pain, what is permissible by God as far as what the attending doctors may do? Maria states, a soul told me once that he had to suffer great deal because he had been a doctor who had shortened the lives of some of his patients with injections to lessen their sufferings. Doctors may never kill a patient, but they are allowed to administer drugs to lessen the pain. Only God gives and removes life. Otherwise, it is murder, like all other murders. Maria, when a doctor takes life of the patient, does the soul of the patient then have to suffer the unfinished time that it should have suffered on earth in purgatory? Or does a doctor then himself have to carry that suffering later on? The doctor himself does. And if he does not turn and stop with his confession, penance, or reparation on his own accord, then his family, the following generations, will carry the consequences and do so dearly. Goodness, do you know of cases where the following generations suffered? And how and in what way did they suffer? Oh, yes, I do. One case I remember now concerned the daughter-in-law of a doctor who was regularly euthanizing his patients. She had lost many babies, yet both mother and father were entirely healthy, and the doctors were completely mystified by the many stillbirths that she had suffered. This suffering carried by the couple in the younger generation was partial reparation that God needed for the sins of that euthanizing doctor. That was God's justice. Does that then mean, Maria, that every abortionist and his family will have to suffer all that which the infants he has killed would have suffered during their entire length of their normal lives? Had they been permitted to live their lives as God had planned for them? Yes. Unless they stop with it immediately and make up for it, it surely does mean that. Maria, I've heard it said that the cities of Sarajevo, Mostar, and Vukovar were, before the breakup of the former Yugoslavia, the cities where abortions were most easily available in that country. When it comes to God's justice, does it then follow why those cities suffered the most damage during the Balkan War? It certainly would. Where sins against life are concentrated, God will arrange for his justice in unavoidable ways. May that example be a warning to all the governments, courts, and doctors of the East and the West. I gleaned so much from this book. That's why we learn from the Bible that a generational curse goes on to 3 or 4 generations, but blessings go on to 100 generations. I've also been praying for the souls in purgatory of my family, my grandchildren's families on the other side, that the Lord releases any family member in purgatory that is still blocking the graces that come down to my grandchildren or my daughters. We are all tied together. We are all one family. What one person does affects the other. What you do affects so many others. What they do affects you. Don't take things at face value. Ask the Lord. Ask the Lord some of these questions that Nikki Eltz asked Maria. Is this my fault or is there someone else? The Lord will let you know. And then, of course, you, like Maria says, can help get them out of there. I'm Dr. Christine Bacon. Thanks for watching this informational Bacon Pit. And as always, remember to live your life sunny side up.